Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Well, today, world stocks seem to be leaving behind a volatile January, starting the new month on firmer ground. That's after reassuring comments from the U.S. Fed helped to calm rate hike jitters. Now, emerging markets were up, with MSCI's EM index climbing 0.3% on the day. And that's despite lower volumes as Chinese markets close for the Lunar New Year celebrations. Now, the JSE All-Share climbed over 8% as banks continue to fare particularly well. In Nigeria, a strong January continued into today. The All-Share was up 8% on the day. That's after gaining 9.15% in January. Now, also coming up on today's show, Nigeria is expected to feel the ripple effect from a decision to keep a costly fuel subsidy. Jaguar Land Rover loses $12 million in the last 3 months amid the global computer chip shortage. And we'll bring you traditions and celebrations from around the world, marking China's Year of the Tiger. Well, we start off today's show in Nigeria. The country's budget deficit is set to rise following the government's decision to retain a costly petrol subsidy. Now, the government had been set to remove the subsidy by June this year, but changed its mind after labor unions in the country threatened a nationwide strike. However, analysts say that the decision to retain that subsidy will put Nigeria under more financial strain, as of course the government may have to borrow in order to fund the subsidy. Here's CGTN's Deji Bademosi reporting.
Nigeria's 2022 budget deficit of $15 billion has been a huge talking point in the country. But the debate is about to get even more heated. It all boils down to the decision of the government to retain the controversial petrol subsidy.
Because Mr. President is a very human president and is concerned for the plight of our people, especially the less privileged, he believes that the impact that removal of subsidy will have on the vulnerable, poor and vulnerable Nigerians should be mitigated. And he believes that certain structures must be put in place prior to the removal of subsidy. All those structures are not right now in place.
The government has now decided to maintain the subsidy for the next 18 months, and it's also warned that it may have to borrow to fund it.
The Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC, has presented to the ministry a request for 3 trillion naira as fuel subsidy for 2022. We have several reconciliations with NNPC, and NNPC itself is owing, in some cases, government. So we want to be able to settle some of the subsidy costs through this reconciliation process. So when we're done with that, whatever is left that we're not able to apply to what NNPC is owing the Federation will now be increasing the deficit, and that means increased domestic borrowing.
Nigeria's domestic consumption of refined petrol is estimated at 65.7 million litres per day. Analysts say the 3 trillion naira or $9.1 billion been requested by NNPC as subsidy payment for 2022 could even go up with rising oil prices. And that would certainly worsen the budget deficit.
Clearly, this is not sustainable, but we need to see how far the government can go. The last report that the minister gave when she was reviewing the 2021 budget showed that debt service to revenue was 76%. In other words, as at November, we had an actual revenue of 5.5 trillion, and we had a debt service which was paid 4.2 trillion. It was 76%. And she admitted that it was one of the highest on the continent. So generally, this is a very, very big price to pay for the decision to continue with the subsidy.
And even when she talked of reconciliation, when we talk of reconciliation is this: NNPC is basically the director of the government. So if you are talking about reconciliation, whatever reconciliation you are doing is still money that should have come to the government. So it doesn't change anything. The fact of the matter is that this nation will cough out about 3 trillion naira to subsidize petroleum products. And I can tell you that if we invest 3 trillion naira in critical infrastructure in the country, the impact will be so huge that we will begin to narrow the infrastructural gap we have in this country.
The government has dismissed insinuations that its decision to retain the subsidy is more politically than economically motivated. But whatever be the case, the decision will definitely drive up the country's deficit to a whole new level. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's stay in Nigeria. The country's first private sector commodities exchange, Afex, has announced the reopening of its $240 million asset-backed commercial paper. Now, the proceeds of that issuance will be used by Afex to provide pre-qualified agro-processors with low-cost working capital in order to help them purchase commodities required for their production processes at an agreed price, a move the firm says will help to bridge the funding gap between lenders and borrowers in this sector. Now, the new funding is Afex's second in a 3-year commercial paper program that started in the 4th quarter of last year. This round seeks to raise an additional $175 million for processors who are unable to borrow in the commercial paper markets. Afex security is backed by the commodities, serving as the credit enhancement in the transaction. Well, let's get more on that from Ayodeji Balogun. He is the CEO of Afex. Great to have you with us on the show today, Mr. Balogun. Now, of course, let's start off with the funding. You say that this funding will be used to help stabilize Nigeria's agriculture sector, mainly, as we mentioned, by offering agro-processors in the country low-cost financing. So give us some insight into how the firm structures the financing that it offers, and certainly how it helps support players in the agriculture sector in Nigeria overall.
Thank you for having me. So agriculture is a large part of the continent. In Nigeria, it's 25% of our GDP, but only gets about 5% of credit to the private sector. This disproportionate share of capital to a sector that is growing and is being the most resilient in the country is something that we feel needs to be addressed. We see a funding gap of about 2 trillion naira to the agricultural sector. And we constantly worry about how to bridge this gap and particularly ease the transition from commodities to capital. One of the things that we've launched innovatively so last year was the asset-backed commercial paper. And what this allows is to allow tier 2 corporate players to be able to tap and access capital from the capital market. We're excited about this launch, and now we are raising $175 million after a series that was successful in Q4 and the first issue that happened in 2021.
Now, of course, this will be the second in a 3-year commercial paper program that Afex started in 2021. Last time, you said you raised about $65 million. This round, as we mentioned, seeks to raise an additional $175 million. How did investors respond to the previous round, and what are your expectations this time around?
So in the last round, we were actually oversubscribed by 20%. Investors particularly liked for two reasons. First, it gave them above inflation yield, which was good for balancing portfolio. Second, it also gave them an impact-related asset class, an asset class that actually solved the critical problem in the sector. So considering ESG requirements, we actually did get a lot of buy-in across several tiers of investors. We also expect very strong, and we have a very robust pipeline. We do think that will be received just as warmly, and as well that this asset class will on this round live to its true potential to solve a big critical gap in the financing fabric of the country.
Of course, Afex is a first for Nigeria. And last we checked, the platform had about 250,000 farmers. You also trade crops ranging from maize, soya bean, rice, cocoa, amongst others. Give us some insight into the growth the company has seen so far.
It's been tremendous. So if you look at the last 3 years, our revenues has grown by about 30, in a multiple of 30. So we've grown from, so this year, in 2021, we did a turnover of about $200 million. And we expect to hit about $600 million by this year in 2022. So we're growing about 3 times year on year. We expect to sustain that pace of growth for another 3-4 years. And this is just precisely because we are in an untapped territory. It's almost over a decade since a commodities exchange has gone live with active trades on the continent in Africa. So we see an emerging and very strong and large opportunity pool where we've picked our tent, and we have successfully proven a model for commodities exchanges to actually scale across Africa. So part of our growth strategy is actually to expand to a few other countries over the next 3-4 years.
Well, tell us a bit more about that, because you had planned to expand into countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Uganda, also Tanzania on this side of the world, rather. What's the latest on that?
So we did launch successfully in Kenya, and we've done well over 5,000 metric tons in commodity traded in Kenya. And as we're speaking now, that we're getting into the planting season in the major hub in Kenya, and we plan to provide input financing to about 15,000 farmers. This is, first time in that market where a player is bringing a complete end-to-end solution, right from financing the farmers with the right training, the right education, access to storage, and access to market in one bundle. So we've seen tremendous uptake, and then there's actually huge potential to grow in the region. We will be transiting over the next sort of 3-4 years into Cote d'Ivoire, markets like Republic of Benin, markets like Uganda and Tanzania in East Africa as well, and then spread from these hubs across a few other African countries.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks for joining us on the show today, Mr. Balogun. That, of course, is Ayodeji Balogun, CEO of Afex. Well, let's move on now. In the last hour, there have been reports of gunfire in the capital of Guinea-Bissau near a government compound where a cabinet meeting was being held. It is not yet clear who was behind those gunshots. A security source says that people inside the building have been shot. Others are claiming that 2 people have been killed. West African Regional Bloc ECOWAS has condemned the incident. Well, let's now cross to CGTN's Alan Mbalo. He is in Bissau, the capital of Guinea-Bissau, with the latest on that. Great to have you with us, Alan. Give us some clarity on what is going on currently in the country.
Now the situation is under the control. The head of state is safe. He left the zone where he was just since this morning when they started shouting, and now he's at the State House and the palace. And I joined him by phone 10 minutes ago. He told me I'm safe, alhamdulillah, and I'm just preparing to go back home. And also the ministers that was just with him, all of them have been dropped at the personal residence, the private residence. And the situation is still under the control. But according to some information I got, many people have been arrested, and we are waiting maybe by the evening to get an official communique, and maybe by tomorrow the head of state will have just a message for the people, for the nation of Guinea-Bissau.
Well, many thanks, Alan, for that update. We'll certainly keep you updated as the news comes in. Well, let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. Total Energies and its partner China National Offshore Oil Corporation have reached a deal with Uganda and Tanzania to invest more than $10 billion in developing crude oil production in East Africa. The project will cover the development of oil fields, processing facilities, and a pipeline network in Uganda, plus an export pipeline through Tanzania to carry landlocked Uganda's crude to a port on the Indian Ocean. And miner Anglo Gold Ashanti says that it expects its annual earnings to slump by up to 42%. It attributes the drop to lower gold sales, increased inflationary pressures, and pandemic-fueled impact on costs. Now, the gold miner says it expects headline earnings per share to come in at between $1.37 and $1.53 for the year ending December 31st, 2021. Of course, last year, the company reported headline earnings per share of $2.38. Meanwhile, Royal Dutch Shell said that it was rerouting oil supplies to other depots following a cyber attack on two subsidiaries of German logistics firm Marquardt and Bahiers earlier this week. The companies, Oil Tanking Deutschland GmbH and Mapanaft, were hit by an attack which disrupted its IT systems and supply chain. Now, Marquardt and Bahiers told its business partners it was working to solve the problem according to emergency plans. And finally, MTN says that it has raised $280 million through an oversubscribed sale of its shares in MTN Nigeria, a move which is aimed at broadening its shareholder base in the country. Now, the sale of 802 million shares was 1.2 times oversubscribed, with the offer reducing the group's shareholding in MTN Nigeria to 75.6% from 78.8%. And that's a recap of corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, but still to come on the show. We'll tell you why bankers are threatening to go on strike in Zimbabwe, while South Sudan plans to reduce taxes on businesses in the country.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came
tear
in.
gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's go to Zimbabwe now, where bank workers have threatened to go on strike. And this comes after lenders offered them a one-off 61% annual pay rise and rejected their demands to be paid in US dollars. Now, the president of the Bankers Association of Zimbabwe says the pay rise will be for non-managerial employees and meant to guide the industry on minimum pay standards. The pay hike will see the lowest paid bank employee earn about $362 a month. That's up from $72 a month. The call to be paid in greenbacks follows similar demands by government employees and comes as the U.S. currency is mostly being used to purchase needed supplies. Meanwhile, South Africa's Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, met with CEOs and senior management of coal mining companies and unions operating in the country. The meeting focused on the challenges facing the coal sector and how the sector can improve sustainability. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more.
The conversation on the growth in the local mining sector happened against the backdrop of promises made to other world leaders to reduce carbon emissions by 2030. The coal sector has been silent until now.
Coal producers must be part of decision making. Nobody must talk about them without them. They are written off by everybody else, including renewable energy lobbies. They all write off coal. And coal is silent. I'm saying, no, coal must say, this is what we want to do in the process of moving from high carbon emission to low carbon emission.
Several hundred coal sector players and operators attended the meeting, with many more online participating virtually.
My worry with this type of engagement is that we tend to come and talk and then we leave. There's no clear plan on how we're actually going to take forward some of the great ideas that you get from the people talking here.
All the major unions were present and weren't scared to raise their issues about the future of coal and the need to work together.
We shouldn't just be sitting on the floors and try to participate in the debate. Labour must be invited. It must be told up front what issues are we going to be engaging. Business must stand up, and it must not be Minister Mantashe's one show. But of course, I think he has opened up the debate today.
The conversation centered around a just transition from high carbon emissions to low carbon emissions and the future role of coal.
How do we make sure that we make this to be meaningful conversations that will ultimately have impact on what we are actually trying to achieve?
Mantashe called on the coal mining sector to set the tone and to get their messages consistent.
I'm not saying lobby us in one voice, we're saying influence decisions taken about you.
The interaction in the coal mining sector is an important one. It's the start of a process. It didn't come to an end today, and hopefully all the players will get involved to take this forward. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Meanwhile, several telecom companies in South Africa have submitted their bid applications to the regulator on Monday. This will ensure they get a place at the spectrum auction in March. Now, Tuesday was the last day for applicants to get their paperwork in. If all goes according to plan, this will be the first auction in 15 years. Here's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
Telecom providers have been desperately waiting for spectrum. Currently, the frequencies that enable mobile calls and data use are heavily congested. More spectrum will ease up the lines, provide better connections, and reduce the cost of data.
Council will issue a statement either later today or tomorrow in terms of the number of bids that they have. Then there will be a process of the bids being publicly available before the auction starting on the 8th of March. It's in the economy's best interest to have the spectrum licensed. We're already about 16 years behind in terms of the licensing of high demand spectrum. Licensees are under considerable pressure.
But many are worried that there may be another delay. One of South Africa's largest telecommunications providers, Telkom, went to court in December to stop the bidding, arguing that the process must be reviewed.
Remember, once this thing is licensed, it's gone for 20 years. It's a now or never. So whatever decision you accept, you must know that you must live with it for 20 years. So for us, doing this thing properly and licensing it out is very important because it affects competition.
Telkom withdrew part of its application against ICASA last week, allowing the application to bid to go ahead. but it still has a court hearing in the first week of March that could see a postponement.
It's a very elaborate process. It's a very capital intensive. Not everybody comes. So as you may see in the last application, only the current holders of spectrum apply because they have the networks necessary to monetize the spectrum. Because once you buy the spectrum, there's no magic. Then you must go and buy the electronics and the network equipment to be able to broadcast it.
The regulator will assign qualifying applicants frequencies in the 700 and 800 megahertz bands.
These are the bands affected by the digital migration as the minister switches off in the various provinces. As we've seen, we have another switch off scheduled for tomorrow. Then the spectrum becomes available. These are critical coverage bands, which means that networks are able to deploy fewer base stations and have broader coverage.
Due to continuous litigation between ICASA and the networks, companies have previously submitted their applications but have never made it to the auction. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And heading to South Sudan now, the government says it is working on reducing taxes on businesses in the country in a bid to attract investments. Now, relative peace has returned to the country after the 2018 peace deal, but the 6-year civil war has left South Sudan's economy in ruins, with foreign direct investment almost non-existent except in the oil sector. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more.
Business people in South Sudan say their costs keep rising. There is no centralized taxation system. Government agencies such as Revenue Authority, Fire Brigade, City Council and state governments set their own taxes and levy them on businesses, and each agency collects their dues separately.
They close, even the supermarket, they have closed, remaining only us. The most difficult challenges we are facing is the city council that they are charging us, even the government, even the rent, the house rent is too much. This is the major problem we are facing, and the business is not booming very well.
COVID-19 has negatively affected small and medium enterprises here. There are also currently no financial services such as loans that businesses can access. South Sudan's government says the country is endowed with abundant natural resources such as arable land. However, to get investors into the country remains a challenge due to unpredictable security situation. The country's investment ministry says it has unearthed a scam by suspected government officials who take money from potential investors and issue them fake certificates, and it is now working on simplifying the tax system to attract more investment.
Our researchers went to the market and they could able to raise more than 28 taxes which are actually leveled on the business, which is really too much in this country. We are discussing it in financial reform management.
It also says it wants to use the current prevailing peace to promote investment in the country and unlock the economy's potential. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come on the show. Jaguar Land Rover loses $12 million amid a global computer chip shortage. And a bilateral trade between China and South Korea gets a boost from the RCEP free trade agreement.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
and holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. Now, the global chip shortage is taking a toll on car production around the world. Jaguar Land Rover has lost around $12 million in the last 3 months of 2021, and that's amid the chip shortage. The UK car maker saw its retail sales fall about 37.6%. That's compared to a year earlier, as it sold only 80,126 vehicles in the quarter to the end of December. Now, despite that fall in production, the company saw a revenue increase of 22% on the previous quarter. Manufacturers around the world have been hit hard as they struggle to secure supplies of semiconductors, as well as battle COVID-19 restrictions and rising prices of raw materials. Meanwhile, China's Commerce Ministry says the RCEP is conducive in promoting high-quality development of bilateral trade and investment. From January to June 2021, the bilateral trade between China and South Korea was nearly $170 billion, a year-on-year increase of about 30%. Now, China's exports to South Korea were nearly $70 billion, a year-on-year increase of over 30%, while imports from South Korea were $100 billion, a year-on-year increase of 25%. The RCEP will help South Korea's export-driven economy see more benefits from the world's largest free trade deal. Well, our reporter Chen Tong gets some perspective from a South Korean exporter in China's financial hub of Shanghai.
This milk pan by South Korean brand Glasslock has lots of promotions in China. At around $30, it's a bargain. But it could be cheaper. Currently, each piece is taxed at around 7%. But with the RCEP free trade deal, tariffs will be less. That also means a potential expansion in the Chinese market.
If our retail prices are lower in China, we'd have more opportunities to sell our products all over the country.
China is already Glasslock's biggest market outside South Korea. Total sales reached $158 billion last year, a double-digit growth from 2020. But the company is also keeping an eye on other RCEP member states.
Our CRISPR bins have been exported to more than 70 countries through RCEP. We hope to export more to Southeast Asia following this agreement.
Official South Korean data suggests that the country's exports hit a record high last year, boosting economic growth by 4%, the fastest expansion in 11 years. South Korea's economy relies heavily on exporting goods. The RCEP not only increases South Korean exports, but diversifies them, allowing more opportunities in the service trade. Traditional exporters like Glasslock will welcome more opportunities. But experts say intangible exporters, such as those in the culture and entertainment sector, will also gain easier investment access.
The World Trade Organization used to focus on trade in goods. RCEP brings crucial liberalization of trade in services and investment, in addition to trade in goods. It has redefined trade in services. In fact, it has taken away the barrier among member states. The cultural and entertainment industry is an economic pillar in South Korea.
Last year, South Korea's culture budget was over $6 billion, a 6% year-on-year growth. And analysts forecasted that figure to rise. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Well, CGTN's Chen Tong also spoke with the Consul General of South Korea in Shanghai to find out how the deal will further boost one of the most advanced economies in East Asia. Take a listen.
China, Japan, and South Korea are the three largest economies in East Asia, and the three countries have been discussing to establish a free trade zone for almost 20 years.
Yes.
And now they are all in RCEP. So how would a free trade benefit the economy in East Asia?
The RCEP, the member states' economic development, the level is quite wide. So in order to all these countries put in one same plate, we have satisfy ourselves to the minimum level of country's situation. But if we forge three countries FTA, then we can relieve from that kind of restraint, and we can forge a most dynamic and advanced economic integration. I think that integration will happily bring much more economic opportunity, not only for three countries, but all other, the world.
South Korea is relying heavily on exports. So do China and other ASEAN countries. So do you think RCEP will also make the competition more fierce in the future?
Of course, yes. That is why. That is why we make RCEP. One of the reasons to make RCEP is to make our competition more fierce. Well, that competition is suppliers' competition. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good thing for consumers like us and also for suppliers themselves. That competition, a sound, healthy, strong competition, makes them more strong. So if they will train inside of RCEP, I think they can compete much better outside of RCEP.
Well, let's go to Ukraine now, where the president has announced he will increase the size of the country's armed forces by 100,000 over the next 3 years. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky has also promised to increase salaries and pensions in a sweeping new package that will improve the living conditions for the country's military. Now, this comes as hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers remain close to Ukrainian borders. In the east of the country, where Ukrainian soldiers have been fighting separatists suspected of receiving Russian support since 2014, residents are somewhat apathetic about the prospects of a potential new war. Natalie Carney reports from Avdiivka, East Ukraine.
Sergei has kept pigeons since he was in school, nursing each new egg as his own child. Since 2014, when fighting between the Ukrainian army and separatists broke out just 2 kilometers away, he has found even more solace in caring for his birds.
They do help me, a lot of times. Any crisis, I go to the dove house. I sit here on the bench. I feed them. They coo in return, and you leave the dove house happy.
Avdiivka has been one of the hot spots in the ongoing tensions in the east of the country. The fighting has affected the economic conditions here. Jobs are sparse and many of the buildings have been damaged by shelling. Reminders of the 8-year-long conflict are never far away.
On January the 29th, 2017, a battle broke out between separatist forces and the Ukrainian army stationed near Avdiivka. That fighting lasted for 5 days. In the end, 10 Ukrainian soldiers and many civilians were killed. Dozens had been injured in what is still being considered one of the deadliest battles since 2014. Now, 5 years on, and residents here are still worried about the potential of war.
In general, daily life continues as usual, with many remaining philosophical about the prospect of conflict on their doorstep.
After a 24-hour shift at work, there was shelling. The building was shaking. The walls were dancing. One glazing went off. I stood and thought, it doesn't matter which side it will come from.
Of the 100,000 or so soldiers Russia has amassed along its border with Ukraine, many are close to Ukraine's separatist area, an area many believe to be supported by Moscow. Semiko Ilya's house was completely destroyed when fierce fighting broke out around Donetsk airport. Yet he doesn't believe Russia is planning to invade his country.
I
do not believe anything will happen. There will be no offensive. This is all to hit Ukrainian economics. It loses a lot because of the panic. It's just to make panic, and Ukraine loses billions of dollars.
Moscow has repeatedly said it has no intention of starting a war, but insists Ukraine will never join NATO. While world leaders lay out warnings and red lines in this potential conflict, people here are watching and waiting to see how this crisis plays out. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Avdiivka, East Ukraine.
Now, of course, Western countries are threatening to impose sanctions on Russia if it invades Ukraine. While CGTN's Alyosa Milenkovic speaks to one local business in a Russian town on the border with Ukraine to find out how they're coping.
Cheerful Cow. That's the name of this ice cream factory that employs 700 workers here in Belgorod. The frozen dessert is exported to countries from Israel to China, and people enjoy their ice cream. But the interesting thing in this current situation is that their ice cream is one of the top sellers in Ukraine's breakaway regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, a fact that didn't go unnoticed by many in Kiev.
For 2 or 3 years, we have been included in the list of companies on which some kind of sanctions have been imposed. But it looked so ridiculous that it did not harm us, but gave us additional media exposure. So when everything started there, as we were close to the Lugansk and Donetsk regions, we started deliveries there. But regardless, for us, it is still Ukraine.
Dmitry is unfazed by the sanctions on the company. He admits that Cheerful Cow has seen a production boom after the West introduced the first wave of sanctions on Russia in 2014. The possibility of new sanctions would, according to him, just further motivate the entire country to be more self-sufficient and less reliant on foreign goods. Yet the analysts in Moscow do not entirely share his optimism, as the spectrum of the expected sanctions might damage the economy on a broader scale. But they also think that not all Western countries are interested in more sanctions.
German businesses are also interested in no sanctions and looking to circumvent sanctions and finding loopholes. They will increase the costs, so the business is not interested in this. Countries such as Italy or Austria, which have deep economic ties with Russia in trade, in the energy sector, also say they are against sanctions.
Yet, some critics here question who's pushing for the sanctions and who'll benefit from them the most. The question of imposing new sanctions on Russia is more complicated than ever. Russians are aware that those might hurt them a lot. But they hope the Europeans also know that in today's interconnected world, those sanctions would hurt the rest of Europe too. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Belgorod.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Brent crude oil was down over 8%, but still hovering near a 7-year high. Now, prices were weighed down by speculation that OPEC Plus could go further than expected and add supply at a meeting this week. Also, trading was driven by expectations of a rise in U.S. inventories. Meanwhile, benchmark copper prices rose today as we saw the U.S. dollar losing some ground. The metal is often seen as a leading indicator of global economic health. Well, it dipped 2.2% in January, pressured by the dollar strength that makes, of course, greenback price metals more expensive on the market. Well, let's take a short break now. Still to come. We'll bring you traditions and celebrations from around the world, marking China's Year of the Tiger.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, China has not been alone in observing the Lunar New Year. Other Asian countries and Chinatowns around the world are also celebrating. Here are reports from 3 nations.
This is the old Chirenchai community, known as the trading hub for joss paper. This small alley gets quite congested during this time every year as people buy ritual-related items such as lucky charms, ornaments of Chinese gods, crafted paper as offerings for deceased relatives. The Lunar New Year is a tradition that seems to predate time itself, just like Bangkok's Chinatown. A man writing Chinese calligraphy as he has for decades, writing in gold on red paper positive words such as prosperity, wealth, and happiness. A tiny museum on the 2nd floor of an old shophouse where Chinese opera performers once lived. Restaurants over a century old, still using the same recipes from the past. And all the roads around here inevitably leads to this temple. This is the largest, perhaps most important Chinese temple in Bangkok. Every Chinese New Year, it is a hotspot of activities where much of Bangkok's Chinese population seems to suddenly converge. The smell of incense, the sounds of chanting dominate as hundreds of people pray to the gods for fortune, for luck, for a better year ahead.
I'm in Seoul, South Korea, a country in which the tiger plays an important role in the founding story of the nation. People would normally be traveling across the country, meeting with family, sharing meals, and paying their respects at ancestral shrines and graves. But like so many other people during the pandemic, we've had to settle for a video message. During the New Year here, youngsters bow to their elder relatives and are rewarded with a bit of pocket money. But another important part of the season is visiting family shrines and graves. Here there are restrictions too, though not at outside sites, like this one on the southern side of the demilitarized zone, which divides the Korean peninsula. For people whose ancestors lay on the other side of the barbed wire in the DPRK, where even tougher COVID restrictions are in place, meaning it's a bumpy start across the entire Korean peninsula for the year of the black tiger, which people still hope will evolve, as foretold, to be as bold, courageous and confident as the tiger itself.
I'm Sarah Walton in New York, where decorations are up in Manhattan's Chinatown to welcome the Year of the Tiger. Now, despite a recent increase in COVID-19 infections caused by the Omicron variant, the number of new cases in the city is now falling, and so most in-person events are expected to take place as normal. Celebrations begin with a firecracker ceremony on February the 1st, and then a so-called Super Saturday returns on February the 12th, where dozens of lion dance crews take to the streets of Chinatown to bring good luck and ward off evil. And the annual New Year parade will be held on February the 20th. But the ongoing risk from the pandemic means some events are only going ahead virtually. Footfall fell dramatically in New York's Chinatowns during the pandemic. The hope is the Lunar New Year celebrations can help bring back crowds to this colourful corner of the city.
Now, Chinatowns in the UK also held various events to welcome the Lunar New Year. And of course, tens of thousands of Chinese nationals celebrated with their families and friends. Here's Noeed Jabrakil reporting from London.
Before the coronavirus pandemic, Chinese New Year celebrations in London were said to be the biggest outside Asia. But because of COVID-19, celebratory events have been scaled back here for a second year. The always buzzing Chinatown was the centre of festivities, with the night markets welcoming in the Year of the Tiger.
I think it's a wonderful experience. We're actually not from here, and to be honest, it's really lively and just a wonderful time to spend with your friends and family.
It's very good, and I get some money from my parents, from my relatives, and from my colleagues. I feel super happy. I enjoy it.
Every Chinese miss their home, but London is a fantastic city. We can, you can see the environment here. So I think we have, really traditional atmosphere. So we can have a really good Chinese New Year in London.
Similar events will also be taking place in other parts of the UK, including Chinatowns in Manchester, Liverpool and the Scottish city of Glasgow.
Of course, food is a major part of celebrations this week too, and many restaurants here are hoping to see a boost in business off the back of all of this. It's been a difficult few years with COVID-19, with some operators here seeing visitor numbers fall by as much as 50% in months when restrictions have been in place.
At nearby Trafalgar Square, one of London's most recognisable landmarks, Nelson's Column, was lit up red to mark the new year. With pared back live performances, much of the experience was virtual. But up and down the UK, there'll be plenty of private celebrations too, with almost 400,000 ethnic Chinese living in Britain, and according to China's embassy, more than 200,000 of its nationals are currently studying in the country.
The Year of the Tiger was welcomed in relatively small-scale fashion here this year, but with most COVID-19 restrictions scrapped across much of the UK last week, many here are confident that things will look a little more like normal next year. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand rose 0.6%, holding gains from the previous session. That's after the South African Reserve Bank's forward guidance was seen as less hawkish than the market expected. Meanwhile, Uganda's shilling is a top performer on the continent this year. The currency, which is the fifth best performer in Africa, is expected to keep strengthening against the dollar in the short term, adding to gains of 1.4% in January and 0.3% in December, as of course the flow of foreign funds increase. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.